There is one thing that all of the important Batman stories have in common, and it is that through storytelling, they provide us with a better understanding of the characters in the Batman universe. Such is the case of Knightfall, one of the most enduring and popular Batman stories of all time. The enormous success of the story is due to the fact that it helps us understand Batman as a character through the lens of a very compelling and entertaining story. What makes a Batman story outstanding is the challenge that the hero has to overcome. The bigger the challenge, the more interesting the story, and Knightfall introduced the biggest challenge that Batman has ever encountered. Knightfall was conceived as a long-term project which would saw the fall of Bruce Wayne as Batman, another man taking the mantle of the Bat, and the eventual return of Bruce Wayne to his rightful position. Even though Knightfall began in 1993, the Batman creative team in the comics started working on the storyline 1 year prior before it officially started. The leader of the project was the Batman editor Denny O'Neil, who gathered a group of writers and artists to tell this massive storyline. Knightfall took place in the ongoing Batman publications, and as early as 8 months before it started, they began introducing themes, characters and ideas building up to the beginning of the storyline, and this is what is commonly known as the Prelude to Knightfall. The primary theme that they had to build up was the idea of a weak Batman. They needed to take the character and explore his weaknesses in order to drive him to his breaking point. And in this video, we are taking a closer look at the weaknesses of Batman to understand him better as we check out the Prelude to Knightfall. It all begins in Batman 484, which is not only the first chapter, but also the first single issue I ever read more than 13 years ago. For being my introduction into the world of Batman comics, this story will always have a special place. This issue introduced for the first time in the Batman comics the idea that Bruce Wayne had lost his edge. Bruce feels like a broken man. His constant struggle against crime, day in and day out, has finally caught up to him. On top of that, he has a brief encounter with Vicky Vale, the woman he once loved, but he chose to let go. Vicky Vale is a reminder of the sacrifices Bruce has made to keep Batman going, of the difficulties he has endured in order to be an effective crime fighter. This first story introduces the Batman's greatest weakness, and that is the fact that he prioritizes his mission as a crime fighter above his health and his well-being. This weakness is the internal conflict of Batman. In storytelling, the internal conflict is the struggle that a character has with himself. In this case, Bruce Wayne struggles with the consequences of being Batman. In almost every Batman story, this struggle is well balanced, but in this case, Bruce is losing the fight. In other words, Batman's biggest challenge is himself, but that's not his only challenge. Besides having an internal conflict, any good story must have an external conflict, the outside forces that challenge the protagonist and prevent him from achieving his goals. And this is where the villains of the story come into play. In Batman 484, Black Mask makes his first comeback to the Batman comics. Black Mask was created in 1985 by Doug Moench in his first run in Batman. Now, 7 years later, in his second Batman run, Moench brings back Black Mask. The criminal is out for revenge, and he declares war against Bruce Wayne. Black Mask attacks Wayne Enterprises and kidnaps Lucius Fox, complicating things further for Bruce. Now, despite being exhausted, Batman does all he can to save Lucius and stop Black Mask. And even though he saves Lucius, Batman fails to capture Black Mask, and this is the event that triggers the downfall of the Dark Knight. Stopping Black Mask was always going to be part of Batman's plan of action. However, it became a priority when Lucius Fox was kidnapped. The mission became personal, and Batman did a tremendous effort in order to save someone who is very close to him. Batman and Robin saved Lucius, but in the final confrontation, Black Mask escaped, and Batman was completely frustrated. He blamed himself for allowing Black Mask to escape. Batman saw this as a terrible failure, even though his actions allowed the GCPD to capture most of the False Face Society. Black Mask's organization was dismantled, Lucius was saved, and yet Batman hung on to the fact that he failed to capture Black Mask. Batman feels responsible for being tired and weak, which allowed Black Mask to escape. He feels ineffective, and it's like this that he starts pushing himself beyond the limits. He goes entire days and nights investigating, searching for Black Mask, as if this was his only responsibility. Batman's already dangerous obsession becomes unhealthy. He has a broken nose which bleeds constantly through the nights, and yet he pushes himself further, ignoring the warnings that his own body is giving him. He goes days and nights without food or rest, and he keeps pushing to redeem this failure. In this deteriorated state, Batman confronts Metalhead, a bad guy who wears a costume full of metal spikes and who wants to join Black Mask, not knowing that the crime lord has gone missing. Batman beats the criminal, but it takes everything out of him. He uses every last ounce of energy he had left, which was not much to begin with. This is the image of a Batman that has gone completely out of control, and is more in line with Frank Miller's Batman from The Dark Knight Returns. This is a viciously driven Batman, driven by his skewed notion of himself. Batman has been thrown off balance by his own weakness, and it takes both Robin and Alfred to talk some sense into him and convince him to go back home and rest. Robin and Alfred analyzed the situation and the character of Batman, and they reached the conclusion that Batman's unhealthy behavior is part of his nature, and that the best way to deal with it is by helping him to remain safe and sound. Batman's weakness is his obsession with fighting crime, and if it goes unchecked, it becomes a danger to himself. Batman's strength are his allies, his friends and family, and in this storyline, he keeps pushing them away. Batman chooses his weakness over his strength, and that's the perfect recipe for failure. Batman 486 is a fantastic issue. It dives deep into the dark side of Batman's weakness and gives us a better understanding of him and his relations with Robin and Alfred. It also plants the seeds for the eventual ending of Knightfall, as Tim's father is convinced that Dr. Chandra King Solving will be able to cure his paralysis. And on top of all that, there's also a small cameo by the Batman from the animated series. What more can we ask? After the encounter with Metalhead, Bruce finally decides he needs help. He goes to see a doctor, but physically, there's nothing wrong with him. Bruce takes a week off to rest before coming back as Batman, but on the night of his comeback, things are only worse. Bruce no longer feels the freedom of being Batman. He doesn't feel comfortable in the night. He has depressive thoughts, and his one true desire is that it all comes to an end, permanently. When the bat signal appears in the sky, Batman goes to meet Gordon, but instead he finds Sarah Essen, the commissioner's wife. She tells him that there's an assassin looking to kill James, and that the commissioner has gone looking for the killer. Batman immediately changes his attitude, ignoring his fatigue, his depression, and goes quickly into action to find Gordon and save him from the killer. Sarah is furious to be left behind and shoots the bat signal in a fit of rage. If the Batman's obsession is his negative drive, then his positive drive is saving lives, especially if they are lives of people who are close to him. First it was Lucius Fox, now it's Jim Gordon, the closest thing that Batman has to a friend, and that's why he immediately goes to save him, ignoring everything that's going on in his head. Batman eventually saves Gordon and stops the killer, who puts up a decent fight, but it's ultimately no match, not even for a weak Batman. Gordon is safe, and everything seems back to normal, except that the bat signal is now completely broken. Another clear symbolism of the current state of Batman. The next challenge comes in Detective Comics 654, which features the first appearance of the General. He is Ulysses Armstrong, a teenager with megalomaniac tendencies. He is obsessed with military history and tactics, which allows him to organize the street gangs of Gotham, unifying them into a single, powerful unit. He becomes the leader of the street gangs and goes by the name of the General. Thanks to his military mind, the gangs become a force to be reckoned with, and they threaten to shake the foundations of security, law and order in Gotham. The violence created by this group of misguided people caused Batman an immeasurable amount of trouble and injury, which only contributes to his worsening state. However, the general and his troops are mostly still children, and Batman manages to stop them all, without taking too much damage this time. The final encounter leaves Batman more tired than anything else, but unknown to him, Bane has been watching everything. At this point, Bane was already introduced in Vengeance of Bane, and Detective Comics 656 is his first official appearance in the Batman comics. Bane has been watching Batman, patiently studying him to understand him better before destroying him. With Bane already in the comics, the full picture of Knightfall started to make sense. Only one thing was missing: Azrael. Batman 488 marked the first official appearance of Azrael in the Batman comics. After his introduction in Sword of Azrael, Jean-Paul Valley returned to Gotham and got a job at Wayne Enterprises. This was Bruce's way of thanking him for saving his life, but also he wanted to keep a close eye on him. The first encounter with Azrael is probably the source of all problems for Bruce, as ever since then he was never the same. In any case, that was also the moment when he realized the true potential of Azrael. That's why he asks Robin to train Jean-Paul, in order to prevent him from becoming the Angel of Death he was programmed to be. Robin gives Jean-Paul a new costume, which is almost too similar to the suit of Metalhead. Azrael learns the tricks of the trade very fast, but when they find themselves in close combat, the system kicks in and Azrael becomes a dangerous and reckless fighting machine. Robin has to stop Azrael from killing a criminal with a chainsaw, and that's a clear sign that the system has too much control over Jean-Paul. However, later on, when Lucius Fox is threatened once again, it is Azrael who saves him, showing that there is still hope for him. Meanwhile, Batman's condition is still not good. He passes out in the Batcave without doing any effort, and later on, when he recovers, he tries his meditation techniques only to find out that they don't work anymore. Bruce is trying to get better, but this is a severe burnout, like never before. He seeks help from Dr. Chandra King-Solving, and she gives Bruce some sedatives that help him get some rest, but that also means that Batman is completely out of action. The timing of this could not have been worse, as right then, Killer Croc returns to Gotham. The last time he was seen, Croc apparently died while saving some homeless people. Now he is back and his more primal instincts have taken over, turning him into an unstoppable creature full of rage. Robin knows that Croc must be stopped, and with Bruce out of action, he gives the Batsuit to Jean-Paul Valley. Robin and Jean-Paul try to stop Croc, but as they are fighting the beast, Bane shows up. He wants to test himself against one of the most powerful enemies of Batman, and using Venom, he breaks Killer Croc almost too easily. By now, Bane knows Batman really well, and he quickly realizes that the man in the Batsuit is not the real Batman. The next night, when Bruce Wayne recovers from his long sleep, he quickly goes back to action when a repaired bat signal appears in the sky. The real Batman is back, and so is the Riddler. Gordon gives Batman all the information about the Riddler, and the Dark Knight decides to take on the Riddler alone. And this once again shows Batman's weakness on display. Robin and Azrael are more than qualified to help Batman, but instead he sends them home. In this situation, this is the worst possible decision and shows really poor judgment on Batman's part. The last time he confronted the Riddler was in Dark Knight Dark City, when the Riddler was an extremely dangerous villain. Now Batman thinks he is more than capable of stopping the Riddler, when he can't even stay awake for a whole night. And to make matters worse, Bane is one step ahead from Batman, and he confronts the Riddler first, injecting him with a variation of Venom. The Riddler is pumped like never before, and in the fight with Batman, he shows superior strength and is able to escape. The Riddler then comes up with a second scheme, and is once again challenged by Batman. The confrontation is brutal, as the Riddler is now a physical match for Batman as well as an intellectual match. The fight against the Riddler takes too much out of an already tired Batman, and, in all honesty, Batman comes victorious only because Bane's henchmen shoot the Riddler as to send Batman a message. Up until this point, everything has been a test to watch Batman and study him, but Bane decides that he's had enough, that it is time to present Batman with his biggest challenge ever, to make him fight against all of his most dangerous enemies. It's like this that Bane and his thugs come up with a plan to break out every single inmate from Arkham Asylum. Using advanced military equipment, Bane and his thugs bring down the walls of Arkham, releasing the madness into Gotham. Batman rides to Arkham, all by himself yet again, in hopes to contain the disaster. But when he gets there, it's already too late. The chaos has begun, and this is the worst case scenario. This is the last panel of the prelude to Knightfall. This is the end of the beginning of the end. The image of a broken man, because let's face it, at this point, Batman is already broken. From Black Mask to Bane, the prelude to Knightfall is the showcase of a broken Batman, a Batman that has allowed his weaknesses to get out of control, a Batman that pushes away his friends and allies, a Batman bent on self-destruction. That's the point of this prelude. The situations presented in these stories are increasingly aimed to destroy Batman. External threats like villains seeking to kill people close to him, like Lucius Fox and James Gordon. Maybe that's why he also pushes Alfred and Robin away, to keep them out of danger. However, without them, Batman is all alone against an ocean of madness. This takes a serious toll on his physical and mental health, and this is only a preview of the events of Knightfall. As I said in the beginning of the video, Knightfall helps us understand the character of Batman by showing us his true weakness. Knightfall has such an enormous success and reputation because it provided the biggest challenge Batman has ever encountered. And I'm not talking about Bane or Azrael. Batman's biggest challenge is himself, and that's what makes Knightfall so fascinating. There is no other story that explores the vulnerable side of Batman like Knightfall. Batman is always the most capable hero, but Knightfall reminds us that after all, he is still only human, that he is flawed, that he makes mistakes, and that's one of the most appealing traits of the character. It's certainly fun to watch Batman beat the most impossible odds, but to me it is far more interesting to see him fail and learn from his failures. That is what makes Batman the most human character among superheroes, and that's the whole point of Knightfall. In these days when Batman is considered the paragon of perfection, capable of even the most impossible feats of strength and ability given enough preparation time, it's comforting to know that there's a very long storyline exclusively dedicated to explore the weakness of Batman.